Hello, and welcome to this conversation on learning to flourish. I'm Sabre Cherkowski, and I'm so glad you're joining us. This space is about reimagining schools, education, leadership as opportunities for all of us to flourish together, where we shift the conversation from burnout to agency for well-being. The conversations that we will have today and similar conversations that I will be having with other guests and friends, it's a chance for us to reflect together, to ask questions that matter, and to share what we're learning along the way. And I am so pleased to have as a guest today Dr. Kelly Hanson. Kelly has been integral to my learning and my journey and my research on well-being in schools. So Kelly, I will turn it over to you to say hello, and I am so pleased that you're here today.
Thanks for having me. This is just absolutely wonderful. Yeah, so a little bit about myself. My name is Kelly Hanson, and I have been a passionate educator for almost 25 years now. So, a very young recruit, got out of my teacher education at 22 and just entered this world that has captivated my heart and mind in so many different ways, in so many different roles. Um, but I think at the heart of all of those roles is a real connection to community. So I have been an educator in the classroom. I have supported classrooms from other roles within the school, supporting children with their learning. I have supported schools from an instructional leadership perspective in a district level. I have been a deputy principal. I am currently a principal of a school. I have had beautiful opportunities to work in teacher education at the University of British Columbia. And so it has been a dance in a lot of different directions. But really, I think as this conversation is going to reveal, circling around the same ideas, growing legs to beliefs that just have really anchored me in this time. And then the relationships. So Sabra, it's so exciting to be on with you because you and I do have an incredible history. I think many of the different journeys that I have been on were through getting to know you. And so you were my supervisor for my Master's of Arts and also for my PhD. So working very closely together for 12 years, which I can't even put into words the kind of connection that creates. And so it's really cool to have this conversation because we have shared so many different ideas at different times and just have this decade long conversation. And then it's really unique right now because we've actually been apart for the last, 20 maybe 16 months as I have been living abroad in Australia. So this is a bit of a reunion for us. And it's a continuation of a very long standing conversation.
Yes, well, and such a pleasure, and as you said, to be disconnected geographically so significantly. I think this is the first time in 12 years that I haven't had some kind of a biweekly or monthly connecting point with you. And so that's also like that idea that we're going to talk about today around flourishing and leadership is part of it, I think, is about bringing in community when your community is afar, and
Mhm.
and how the number of times that I have thought of you and, "Oh, I wonder what Kelly would say," or, "Oh, I know Kelly would be really encouraging of this," or, "Oh, this is a book that I'm sure Kelly had shared at some point." And I think we don't credit enough the importance of having the people with us even when they are not with us. And so it's been really great for me to build up this sense of almost confidence in connection when we can't take for granted anymore that you are like, oh yeah, we'll just meet for coffee or we'll go for a run or even just a quick phone call. And even connecting like this takes some pre-planning. So it's really, I think, an interesting way to think about community and the different people that hold us up, even when we don't recognize that until they're gone. So yeah, I think we'll have lots of opportunities to connect in. I want you to share a little bit about your role as principal because you're at a very unique school. And that maybe will lead us into, we had talked about maybe talking about a theme today. And so wondered if you maybe wanted to talk a little bit about the theme that you had proposed and that I was really excited to talk about it. And then we can kind of link into some of the conversations around leadership and flourishing and well-being. But maybe share a little bit about Woodline Primary, and it's such a unique place.
It really is. And I just want to validate what you're saying around how relationships have this agency, and how they have a life force, that lives around you, even when you don't have that day to day connection through memories, through the intuition of that person's voice, and just the confidence that people can build around you. A year and a half ago, I took a big leap and took the role of deputy principal at Woodline Primary. And I think there's so many things that drew me to a small independent school that is on 20 acres. It's on farmland in a little teeny tiny town called Ceres in Australia. And many of them involve family. So my husband is Australian and the age of my daughter. And there was so many things, as like every person when they're making decisions, it's never just one. But what drew me to the school is that the philosophy of the school was so much of the work that I had been wanting to understand more deeply. And that is the question around, what does a school that holds well-being at its heart, what does it look like, sound like, and feel like? I learned very quickly that part of how Woodline holds well-being at its center is by drawing from the philosophies of Reggio Emilia educational project, which is something that I had been curious and done a little bit of learning about prior to my time coming here. The land is truly the third guide or teacher in our space. So it's really about how do we build a school where we are in tune with the land, where outdoor place-based learning is actually at the core. And then further to that is the idea of trauma informed. So, how do we understand each other's stories? And what are the kinds of pedagogies that really support children and families to nurture really positive attachments at home and at school? And how does that all work? So, it is definitely a place that is aspirational. It's an expression of what school could be. It is in its sixth year, so we're super new. And essentially, we're just really building a school on the theories and experiences of children that they bring to us and making sense of it together. To lead towards children that have a really sound sense of well-being in self and well-being for other. And that can be supported in the school environment, but also in the home environment with those ideas. So that's what Woodlight is. That's what we aspire to do. And then since I've been here, having the opportunity to move roles into the principal role has been really exciting as well. So the principal piece is newer for me, and is a new role in my career. I haven't walked this path before. Yeah, I'm very, very excited to do so. Coming at it really through a pedagogical lens, because that's always been my work. So leading principal through the lens of pedagogy, and then really bringing forward what I've learned about being in community, and witnessing community, and then positively contributing to that. But like out my window right now, we have farm animals here. We have chickens. We have sheep and guinea pigs. There are horses on the property. There are dogs here. It's just, it's a really, really, really special place that feels like a home.
Well, and hearing you explain it and sort of thinking about all the different threads that you have kind of kept together over the years that have been pulled on in various projects to have them come together now
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
sort of all of them tying in some way.
Yeah.
That's really exciting. And then to
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
about, your ideas around pedagogy and leadership. I can't wait to unpack those a little bit just to see. We often think about pedagogy and children, but this idea of how do we take what we know about pedagogy and kind of adapt and play with it in relation to adults who are ongoing learners in education, I think that's really an interesting space to
Yeah.
kind of think about in terms of well-being.
Yeah. Well, we did. So you said to share a word that's coming up for
Yeah.
me as I enter into this, and that might help us with this conversation. And that word is embodiment, and I think that a big part of where that word comes from is just even the inner tuition and the inner knowing to even show up here and to put my hand up and say, "Hey, I can come to this place and I can contribute and I can roll up my sleeves," is about paying attention, being really connected, heart and mind, emotions. So even what got me here is very much me trying to, for a long time, be embodied. So knowing how I'm feeling and then turning that into action. So keeping this big connection between the heart, the mind, the body, the spirit. And so that is what I thought that we had planned to talk a little bit about that idea as it relates to leadership. And I think as it relates to decisions that leaders inevitably are making, whether it be what roles they are asked to step into and then are able to show up for, and then how you lead once you're in those positions.
Yeah, I love that, and it kind of takes me back to the conversations that we were having years ago around well-being and thinking about theory U and that notion of sourcing and the importance of intuition, the importance of understanding that ideas come from a larger field, and to access them, we have to let go of stories that are holding us back. We have to open and sense what may be possible, and then we have to allow ourselves to go up either individually or with others into this source of new knowing. And so hearing you talk now about how those pieces, and along with other ideas around synchronicity and leadership, and thinking about the ways of intuition and really connecting into where I had talked originally about you and me and our relationship. We have to sense one another on a more energetic level because we are not physically with one another. And so I think that idea of how do we pay attention to sense in our leadership is really a different way even of thinking about embodiment. I know embodiment means a lot of different things to people, and I really appreciate the way you've located it within that knowing self, understanding the alignment of heart, mind, and body, and then moving towards what is calling to you, and being open to what is around you. And so I'm curious to know, even in your leadership, what does that feel like in a practical sense? We've had so many beautiful discussions with theory over the years, and so it's really exciting to think about practically. Stories maybe that you could share that would help us to understand what does embodiment feel like in the role of a leader, maybe where you are or with what you've been witnessing or noticing or observing.
Mm, just circling to theory you first
Yeah.
because it's so funny that you say that. Because Otto Schwimmer's work and thinking, that is what brought us together. If you actually
Yeah.
remember in
Yeah.
my first lecture that had met face to face, you had dropped that book and I just wrote it down. And then like in our earlier conversations, I'm like, hey, you talked about that book. You're like, "Ah," like I read it. And you're like, the whole thing? And I'm like, yes, it's the whole thing. So that work has been critical to me.
Yeah.
And I think that we all have those stories and narratives and theories that are that critical. And as much as I think I had internalized so much of that thinking and those processes that you just described, I had recently been at a conference here in Australia. It was called Reimagined. And it was educators from all around Australia who were really grappling with some big ideas around regeneration and like the humanness of education. And Theory U and Otto Schwimmer came up. It was one of the first slides. And the slide was talking about moving from phases of listening and responding to actually dialogue and true dialogue and what that means. And I was just like, wow, it was just such a beautiful reminder of the ideas that mean so much to me. And it's that way of like keeping those connections with all the selves that we've been and that we're continuing to just inquire. And that our inquiries don't change as much as we might think that they do. And I actually think that that's a really important piece for me in what I've discovered over time is that we all do have certain ideas that we circle around. We use different language, but at our core, there's a lot of pieces that are the same, and each of us have these different ones, right? So, from a leadership perspective, how do we bring those in conversation with each other and not in conversation with each other around this is who I am and this is what I think. And then we're trying to prove that point or sell it or, have that be the dominant way. But what does it actually mean for me to bring myself and my perspectives and ways of knowing into a circle, into a community, into a dialogue? In a way that actually makes space for others. And then from that, what can we create together? And that's what I think a real community school, that's a high aspiration of what they can offer, particularly when children's voices are at the center of that process. It's very exciting. And also then for a team and caregivers and parents. And so I think a big part of my leadership always has been and continues to be, and where I imagine it into the future, is around how do we construct those kinds of conversations and be mentored and supported to follow those deep, burning, exciting questions that keep showing up for us and then share them with the world in a way that doesn't infringe or take over or compete. Because those are sort of the real conditions for, and then I think you could really start talking about another word that we love and concept that anchors us, and that's the idea of flourishing and flourishing in community. So one of the ways would be definitely thinking about the art of dialogue and what that really means.
I love that. Well, I'm just thinking too about, how this idea of dialogue and listening and paying attention to community, how that has, really been the anchor of your work. Just kind of tie some of these threads together around, as a leader, how do you center self to be in dialogue with the people in the system, rather than be in competition or to try to dominate or be in control of, um, the system, the self, the team. Just saying this connects to some of your doctoral work where you were really trying to center and eventually came to understand the importance of worldview, story, and community. And the piece that was interesting to me that, I think connects to what you were sharing was around this notion of love and how one of the qualities of love is non-dominance and being engaged in community, in dialogue, and that is a challenge as a leader when, your position is hierarchical. And so, I would imagine you would have to work on the daily to be in concert with others and to recognize, when am I trying to, and the word you used was dominate. And I think that that's a word that's coming up right now in sort of the political zeitgeist as well as popular culture. How do we sort of do non-dominance toward, and I don't know that we have a word for what the other option is. You use the word love in your work, and I think that's a really important word. And I share similar values and theorists who talk about the importance of love in leadership.
It's bell hooks that really talked about the absence of domination in love. And that is has always really stuck with me. And really, I often will sign an email, big love. So, and I'm thinking about bell hooks every single time. That is such a core value around love makes space for the other. Love involves acceptance. But love is also, it's more than that, because love is relational. So love is about recognizing that although we may be very different, we are connected and that we can share so much and that our human experience can connect us so deeply in a form of care. And so, yeah, the absence of domination is critical to that, as it is critical in dialogue as well, because we cannot get to an unknown future if we are already so fixed on what that is going to look like. And that is how change happens. And so I think that we are at a time where we think about transformation and really significant new modalities that are going to combat some of the patterns and habits that we're so entrenched in now in schools, in society, that really don't contribute to health and well-being. And so transformation and genuine change is going to require love. It's going to require us to be very much connected, but not determined on where that's going. And being in a school environment, and this is where my heart just shines because I'm around children all day long and they have really exciting perspectives and ideas, and they are so emotionally attuned, I think, to things that adults aren't picking up on. So when we start to bring them into our conversations and really understand the world through their theory making, that also sparks us. So a big part of the pedagogies that I've always really kind of tried to nurture are pedagogies that lead to epistemological agency, if you will, right? The capacity for others. And that's where so much social justice and equity and perspective is so important in these conversations, is because we really want people to speak, to be in touch with the perspective that's so unique to themselves and not just through sort of colonial or hegemonic narratives. So it's not just about telling children that this is the story. I think it's about inviting all of us into a pluralistic, these are many, many stories. And what do they mean to us at this moment in this time? With the realization that other folks may come to a different conclusion at this time from their perspectives. And that all of these things are really important part of figuring and understanding. And they're really exciting. It's a really exciting process. So love is a really is something that I think we should all be contemplating, theory making around, and considering, because it is such a way. It's a way of being and expressing that is so important to all of us. So one that's really, really good for cracking open, and what are the worlds that live within that world? And that's a beautiful question for children. What is love? Right? And they would have the most exciting things to say about that.
Oh, I love what you're sharing. And the word that kept coming up and that is more of a feeling, I think, for me at the moment, but that is also something I've been playing with in this idea of this organizational grace is a concept I've been playing with around sort of some qualities that we need to move into the spaces that you're talking about. And the one piece that was really coming up for me that I think you've really been inspiring in terms of watching you walk in your worlds with this is this idea of vulnerability.
Mm.
And as a learner, being able to let go of control, being able to move into a space where there is non-dominance, being able to move into a space where love is going to be the piece that we are going to be engaging with and talking about and coming back to. And recognizing, how do we help others move into a space around this vulnerability? And I was thinking about, and you shared this book with me, Rebecca Solnit, when you shared that Hope in the Dark. There's something around vulnerability and hope that is really important, and being able to see possibilities that aren't there, even when we're feeling nervous, we're feeling scared, we're feeling hopeless because we don't know where we're going. And so I think that piece around vulnerability, which is very learned, and adults maybe suffer from it more than children until we learn to be vulnerable. So hearing you talk about how, you're able to look to students as your guides for that almost innate joy of creating, and that, how do we create conditions for adults to be able to reimagine that space of creating our worlds together from a source place of love?
Before, coming on with you, I was looking at the flourishing model.
Yeah.
And I had a really big think about the virtues, and done just like the most minor kind of little bit of interest into stoicism. And just this idea of virtue is probably coming into focus for me a little bit more with that, thinking about what is a virtue in general. So, and my understanding is, a virtue is it's a quality of character towards the good. And there are many of them. And that they like bring positive emotion and they are 100% within our control. So, hope as a virtue, and the other flourishing virtues that we've kind of looked at together, compassion, and what is
Trust.
trust? Trust is
Yeah.
so I think part of leadership is living and giving legs to virtue. And those ones, particularly, can really create a container where vulnerability can live so beautifully. Because we know that organizations, the psychosocial hazards of too much uncertainty in a world where there is so much uncertainty, and where people are managing so much on so many levels of their life. And there is that need for grounding, right? And so sometimes within a really chaotic experience, then being vulnerable and being around everybody's vulnerability can really just be unsettling. And I think unsettling for children as well. So I think that when we're looking at cultures of well-being and cultures where people tell stories and tell stories that have where people are doing really hard things, where there is uncertainty, where there is challenging emotion. I think that these sort of virtues um, can lift that up and hold that up and be strong enough to hold and support that. So, what I mean by that is if we've built a culture with trust where people know that they are safe, they can trust their bodies, they can trust, each other, they can trust the rhythms and routines are going to be there, then that's going to be really a strong standing ground for this co-creation. And then hope, it may feel really difficult right now, but we have established a culture that is hopeful. So we know that we are moving in optimistic ways. We know that we are doing this for, we're very hopeful of the outcome of what this could look like? There's like a steadfastness in that that is really important. And then compassion, right? So we can really trust that the community can hold us and is going to, there's a sense of belonging that's not in negotiation when I am sharing vulnerably. So I think the leader can act in those ways and do things in those ways over time. And then that's going to establish that we can be both in a sense of flexibility and uncertainty, but also in a really held, grounded way. I think we talked about that a lot in like what is an adaptive community,
I was just
right? We're
thinking.
supporting ourselves.
Yes.
Want us to be firm and like we need these things.
Yes.
And then where do we play? And what is the
Yes.
relationship between the two? So it's again, it's similar thinking. But yeah, it was really cool looking at the idea that flourishing involves an adaptive community, subjective well-being, leaderful mindsets, and that those things are held by these virtues. And that's where I think leadership is really needed. And we should both say, because this is something I know we both believe when we're talking about leadership, we're not talking about a hierarchical structure
Mhm.
within a system. That's part of, an understanding of leadership. But, I really believe, and I know you do too, that a person can lead from any role that they have in an organization and in life.
Mhm. I love that you brought up, I was thinking exactly that was about the adaptive leadership and this
Yeah.
idea of structures and flexibilities and the ways of connecting in others to the work to have them understand, like, where's my strength? Where's my contribution? Where do I feel a sense of affirmation? How do I start to contribute to building dialogue with others? And I mean, I know that sort of you feel similarly that the joy in leadership is when those spaces are created and lived out, and you see others stepping into their spaces of, co-creating with others or calling into a circle rather than, calling people out and blaming. So, have you noticed in your role, and even though leadership is not about a role, there is something important about the role that also brings, even talking about that groundedness, the container, that sense of trust. Have you noticed in the shift from maybe teacher to you were a designated teacher leader and
Mhm.
then assistant principal and now principal, as you move through the roles, what are you noticing about leadership?
Well, I think in all of those roles, there's different opportunities for relationality, right? So I think being a leader, you really need to understand your context and be accountable to the relationships that you serve. And so, on the level of principal, for example, I think that a big piece of understanding that role and that kind of leadership is really thinking about the system. I think it's a systems thinking role. And thinking about what does it mean to be accountable to all of these different community members, what are and all of these different needs, and all of these different voices, and how is that play? How are those perspectives going to? What do they need? And how are you going to bring them together? And so, where I'm going with this is that in every role, I think you need to have a really specific theory around change management and change evolution and how you are going to help that process along. And depending on where you are in the system, I do think the answers to that are slightly different, and where you give your time and how you organize your priorities are going to be a little bit in relation to what does change and development and growth look like from your perspective in your area. And so as a principal or the leader of a school, you really want to ensure that you're considering and bringing along that community that you're responsible to and inclusive of, and that you're sort of facilitating the communication and the bumping up and the intersection of those relationships. And I think that that is kind of what change facilitation and management is, because every organization, every community is a living ecology. So it is changing and moving, and you want it to be able to grow in really healthy and exciting and inspiring ways. So I think you need a plan and an understanding of how you are going to intentionally give your time and perspective and join those conversations together, if that sort of makes sense.
It makes a
Um,
ton of sense. Can you think of like what have you had to develop in yourself over time to be able to now be in this role where you are building up and living out a new or a different change management theory? Can you articulate or you may have articulated it in your description, but what are there qualities that you've had to develop in yourself that you've noticed?
is about storytelling. And I think it is about narrating and coming along and being a little bit of a holder of those key threads so that you can, like we use that expression of like a story has agency. So a community is building these stories around who we are and who we want to be, and there's so much beautiful connection in that. But that it doesn't always move equitably in a way that is really inclusive to everyone. So I think in a leadership role, you're moving between meeting with caregivers and sitting with the caregiver community and meeting with the other community organizations that are connected to your community, and with the children and with the guides or educators and with the other members of an executive team or a board, for example. And you are, sort of sharing and gathering and empathizing with all of these different perspectives and sort of, I think, trying to introduce them to each other through what you know about the system, because that is going to bring coherence. It's going to bring a sense of shared collective. And I think that it's also going to, like we talked about dialogue, it also is going to enrich the possibility of using everybody's strengths. So I think key people in the organization are quite responsible for having those understandings and finding ways for the communication to flow across the system. Um, so that's something that I really keep my eye on in my role as current. So communication is really, really, really key. And then just letting the the ecology move at a pace that doesn't leave pieces of the system behind. So we want to, like, it's clunky. We're all different. We've all got different priorities, but we sort of want to try to create a rhythm that it doesn't really throw pieces off. So there's that little bit of like balance. So sometimes in our small community, as a guide team and a teaching team, we can get really, really excited. Like, let's do this tomorrow. And some things we can do tomorrow. But also, I think there is some management around, like, this has an impact on so many people, and if we can bring those people in, then it's just going to be all the more powerful. So if we can sometimes be a little bit patient in that, then it just helps to, I think, create a more cohesive experience.
Ooh, I love this. You know what's coming up for me? Remember all the conversations we had way back around mindfulness and systems? And the question you kind of kept posing was, how do we have systems see themselves? And I'm thinking, when I'm hearing you now, it's how do we have the system hear all of its parts. And if I connect it to the theme kind of that we started with today, it's how do we create systemic embodiment? How do we have a system feel itself and be whole and express differently through stories, through experiences, through even just sensing in space and what's coming up? And something you and I talked a lot about was that idea of sustainability is about letting go. How do we let go of pieces of the system that are no longer revitalizing us, that aren't helping to reimagine, recreate? So I think we've just developed a new conceptual model, Kelly Hanson, around systemic embodiment.
Well, I think, and it's the time and patience piece, right? I think something that probably, it's the new year, it's 2026. And I think something that I have found within myself is that I have more realistic expectations of what can happen in a year. So a lot of things happen in a year, but also a year is not a huge amount of time. So I think my timely measurement has changed. And in a way that feels really good. Things happen over decades. Things happen, it's the rhizome. So much is happening under the surface and shooting in different ways. So I'm much more trusting. I think I'm trusting in that process a lot, which takes off some of that urgency, which does really change your thinking about, well, to your point, it welcomes embodiment because you've got time to be embodied. You've got time to figure out what's happening in all the pieces of yourself personally. And then as an organization too. And that doesn't mean that you're not being responsive or that action isn't taken, because that's a very frustrated thing. But I think there's like little actions that we're taking all the time in an education system. But then there is, cultural growth and change and evolution. And that's something that is worth the long attention, which is probably actually how I ended up in a school-based setting. And, because there is a beautiful invitation for me right now to really sit with something in a really specific way, potentially over time. And that's a pretty special way to live a life, I guess.
I love that. So, as I think about sort of all the different ways you talk about leadership and embodiment, what are some of the ways as a leader that you refill and make sure that your embodiment is replenishable? So, how do you kind of bring yourself back to yourself when I'm imagining you are stretched in so many different ways at different times? Like, just talk a little bit about like leadership and well-being in yourself.
Well, I think, everybody has their own ways of keeping themselves well. My ways are definitely through movement. So I need to run, I need to swim, I need to walk, and I have like I need a lot of that, and I just do. And that takes time, but it's just a self-awareness piece that I know. And so I just do it. It's just a non-negotiable. And so that might look like me at 4 o'clock. I'm in my running clothes. I'm at Woodline. Everybody's around me and they see me and I'm like, I'll see you soon. I will be back. And great. Fantastic. And so I'm just doing those things. I'm doing the things. I am a ferocious reader. And so when I'm talking to people, I'm like, I want to talk about what we're talking about now, but what are you reading? Tell me, what are you reading? So I just don't like I don't deny any of those parts of myself. I bring them in and then I hope in doing that it is an invitation for others to do that as well. Because I think of the times where I didn't feel like I could go for a walk at lunchtime or at 4 o'clock, or didn't have that sort of autonomy over that. I was getting that messaging, whether it was intentional or not, from the practices of the leadership around me. So I just always believe that if you're doing things towards your wellness, then it's a sign to others that that's the kind of culture that we're building. But if we're just saying those things, then sometimes it's harder for people to decipher because everybody wants to, it's culture. We can create a culture where, you know, that kind of where we're just like really only rewarding a certain way of working and a certain way of being, or we can create a culture that's not that. And I honestly believe that, people are not less dedicated to the work if they go for a walk at lunch. They are not less dedicated to the work if they, don't want to miss their swim time in the pool or whatever, or their art class or their, you know, whatever favorite TV show. It doesn't really matter, but folks we need those opportunities to do what recharges us.
And do you notice in your work that that is being kind of that invitation to take care of yourself in the way that you need, sort of through modeling? Is that finding its way into the larger culture, do you think?
So I hope so. I think that we're no different than any other organization, that we all feel the immensity of a day in a school environment. And all of us have so many calls on our time. Every single person that contributes to this building has that. And so it's something we name. Right? It's something that we attend to. It's something that we struggle with it. So it's not just everyone's just, but it is a struggle. And I do believe that they here we know that we support each other in making those decisions on well-being, but it's still hard. It's still hard to do that. um but look, you know the cool thing is the children are outside and they're being well, and they're, you know really physical in their expression of learning, and so we get to come alongside that. So that's also a real beauty of our environment, is that we are working with children in ways that are really an expression of the body. So whether it is in play, or the arts are incredibly important here, and so we're all always engaging with materials. So that too is a way that I think there's a lot of well-being in that for the adults and for the children on site.
I love this. Kelly, I could talk with you for so many hours, and this is just the start of our conversation.
Okay.
I wondered if I read a poem by Mary Oliver, which is, she's very special in that I think you introduced her to me. And since I have really found a lot of her poetry really calls to me. It speaks to kind of who I am, who I want to be, who I think I'm not becoming. And I wonder if I read you this poem, because if I think about what keeps me well, when do I feel the most embodied? It's when I'm out in the trees, trail running, hiking, really kind of being physical. So I'll read this poem because it really does to me kind of sing to embodiment. And then why don't we close with, after you hear the poem, what comes to mind for you around leadership, embodiment, well-being, education? So this is Mary Oliver, and it's When I Am Among the Trees. When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locusts, equally the beech, the oaks, and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness. I would almost say that they save me, and daily. I am so distant from the hope of myself. in which I have goodness and discernment and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me, the trees stir in their leaves and call out, "Stay a while." The light flows from their branches and they call again, "It's simple," they say. And you too have come into the world to this, to go easy, to be filled with light and to shine.
It's beautiful. What do I hear? I hear, well, the light and the shine. That is, that shine was my word this year, or last year, 2025. So that's always a really powerful metaphor for me. The idea that we each have a light within us that we can, it's like the namaste, the light in me sees the light in you. So I think that exchange is really powerful. And that metaphor for leadership holds so much, that we can share our own light and honor the light of others. But I think more broadly, it really takes me to, kind of Ellen Langer and thinking about mindful learning. And it just, what happens when, we've already labeled and named and categorized and created all of this real cognitive schema around seemingly, everything. We have names, we have words, we have colors, we have, and in that, something is lost, right? And that is the capacity to look at the world with beginner's eyes and to really see things anew. And the practice of seeing things anew, the practice of noticing the willow and the beach, and then, pairing that with our own inner gladness, to me is really, it's a nod to, the world is so incredible, the aesthetic of it, the way it helps us understand our own inner world and our own emotions. It's all there for us. So all we need to do is just kind of let go of some of that inner dialogue and then just experience it freshly, and then reflect on that experience. And there's a real inner source of light and well-being within that. So it's just a beautiful poem. And I think that is what the natural world offers us when we engage it, that way. When we go out as a seeker, when we go out in anticipation, and also with an openness to experience awe and wonder.
Thank you for being with us. May this conversation spark your own reflections on what it means to learn, live, and of course, lead well. For more information on my research and projects on learning and leadership for well-being, visit leadwell.ok.ubc.ca.